Thanks for joining me for another episode of the Your Longevity Blueprint podcast. Today, my guest is Misty Williams, who spent years struggling to reclaim her health and vitality after brain fog and fatigue tailspin from life-threatening complications from surgery to remove an ovarian cyst. Afterward, her doctor told her she had endometriosis. The only remedies were drugs and surgery. Her labs were normal, and she could Google to learn more about what was happening to her body. At 35 years old, Misty started fighting for her quality of life, enduring many more challenges on her road to healing, including an unexplained 45-pound weight gain, debilitating brain fog, fatigue, hypothyroidism, and premature ovarian failure. She founded healingrose.com to provide high-performing women with the resources and community to successfully confront the unexpected chronic health issues that women often experience as they age. Welcome to the show, Misty.
I'm so excited to be here. Thank you.
So let's start at the beginning. Is there even a beginning? So it sounds like, as I read in your bio, it sounds like your journey started with a routine physical where you asked your doctor to do an ultrasound because you were 35,
That's where
single,
it started.
And worried about your ability to have children. So what was found and where did that lead you?
Yeah. Well, they found an ovarian cyst on my left ovary and told me I needed to have surgery to have it removed. We booked it for the next week. I remember at the time just feeling like, oh, okay. And you just need to remove the cyst. Okay. It seemed all very uneventful.
Mm-hmm.
The next week I went in, it was an outpatient surgery. I didn't tell anybody that I was even having surgery except my mother.
Sure.
Literally nobody even knew. At that time in my life, which is a theme that I eventually unpacked and really had to, instigate a lot of healing around. But at that time in my life, I was uber independent, and I was the one that everyone could count on. And I didn't really have people I could count on, not because people didn't want to be there for me, but because of just how I lived. I am the oldest of four and have always been the person that is responsible for everybody else. And I did not even know how to welcome support into my life. And that was a theme in this whole experience for me. But yeah, I had the surgery. It was a 20-minute outpatient surgery. I was supposed to go home and recover. And it was a Thursday, and I was going to do a follow-up call with the doctor on Monday. And we were just going to debrief on everything. And I remember coming to in the recovery room, like I was coming out of a deep pit, and come to find out the surgery went 2.5 hours because they found a bunch of stuff when they opened me up, which was endometriosis. They found endometriosis in my abdomen and spent an extra 2 hours removing scar tissue. And I went home, and after about 4 or 5 hours, I started vomiting, which was not on the list, by the way. They give you a list that says, if these things happen, here's what you do. There was no vomiting. Vomiting was not supposed to be a side effect of this surgery or a possibility. So I reached out to my doctor and left message after message at her clinic. The next day was a Friday, so they were still open technically. But I never got a call back. To this day, my suspicion is that no one ever even told the doctor I was trying to call. That's what I suspect. So I went into the weekend, not able to keep down food or water, kept vomiting. And by Monday, I was in a lot of pain. My abdomen was very swollen. And I just felt like there was pressure, like someone had hooked me up to, an air pump and just So Monday afternoon, 20 minutes after I was supposed to have heard from my doctor, I called the office because she didn't call me like she was supposed to, and found out that she'd gone home sick that day. And of course, I was by that point just overwhelmed and infuriated, like I don't matter here. Like nobody cares. That's really what it felt like. So the next morning was a Tuesday, and I went up to the doctor's office and checked in with the receptionist. I'm here to see the doctor. And she said, well, the doctor's not coming until 12:30. Why don't you come back? And I said, nope, I will wait. I will not leave until I see the doctor. And about an hour later, the doctor calls me and tells me that she wants me to go to Baptist Hospital, to the emergency room, that she was going to have doctors waiting for me. She was very sorry about this. And she didn't give me much information. I had no idea why she wanted me to go over there. I just was like, well, at least I'm talking to her 6 days later. Right. And they did an MRI and found out that they stitched up part of my small intestine, and that's why I was vomiting. So they wheeled me back for another surgery. They admitted me to the hospital this time for observation in recovery to make sure that I recovered okay. And every night after the surgery, they came in and they gave me Ambien, which I remember at the time thinking, why are you giving me Ambien? I don't have trouble sleeping. I don't take anything to sleep. And they sent me home after I recovered 3 days later. I remember calling a friend. I don't know why this is coming up in this interview. People must need to hear it. I remember calling a friend that I barely knew and asking her to pick me up from the airport because I felt really uncomfortable asking my friends for help. And in reflecting, as my journey unfolded, I started to see that I had this pattern in my life of not being supported, not because people didn't love me, but because of how I kept choosing to show up in the world. And it was conditioning that went all the way back to childhood. I have the story just like everybody else. But I went home and I didn't sleep for 6 days. I went 144 hours without sleep. It was awful. I was unraveling. It's not that I wasn't tired. I was utterly exhausted. I was losing my
Sure.
mind, laying in bed, begging God for sleep. I remember the first night being awake all night, laying there so exhausted, my body would not slip into sleep. And the next day being like, gosh, and I would get up and try to function for the day. But you do that for a couple of days and you're just a zombie. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
it was terrifying. And of course, I didn't call the doctor's office because what had happened to me previously. Now I'm just not able to sleep. And I've connected all the dots later, right? Talked to really smart people that help me see, oh, well, when you have that much stress for a prolonged period of time, you build up so much cortisol in your system that your body can't make any of your sleep hormones. You're just, under so much duress. It was 6 days, by the way, of me having my small intestine stitched up. And I also went 6 days without sleep. And I'm sure there's some kind of, parallel there
Mm.
of like those things
Yeah.
being connected together. But it was terrifying. And after I went in for a follow up with my doctor 2 weeks later, I asked her what causes endometriosis. In my head, I was thinking, I will do anything. I
Right.
will make whatever lifestyle changes I need to make to take care of my body and reverse this. And she said, we don't know what causes endometriosis. You can Google it. I can put you on birth control or we can do surgery again. And immediately something inside of me was like, Mayday, Mayday, like alarm bells were going off in my head,
Yeah.
whoa, you're an OBGYN and you don't know anything about endometriosis, which has been, part of the lexicon for at least 100 years. I mean, we know this is a thing. How do you not know anything about endometriosis? And I've since learned that it's true. That is conventional thought that we don't know what causes endometriosis. You can Google it. But also my experience is a decade later that we actually do know a lot about how to manage endometriosis, right? If you care about knowing, if you look in the right places, you can absolutely find a lot of stuff. But, as a patient back in those days, I had no idea. I just went home terrified. Like, what am I going to do? My quality of life is slipping from my hands. I just had surgery. It was very traumatic. Like the whole thing was so traumatic. And it really started my journey, which was just getting my life back. I was 35 at the time, running half marathons. I've been an entrepreneur most of my career. I had a really vibrant life, and it was very scary to think about a future where now I'm struggling with disease. And
Mm-hmm.
I started spinning out in other ways after this experience. I started having crazy brain fog where I felt like my head was stuffed with cotton balls and my thoughts couldn't get through. I had such a hard time thinking. And as someone who my whole career was my mind,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Like, what do you do when you can't think? It was super terrifying. And the fatigue was just crazy after that. And before this experience, before I went in for that routine physical that was, supposed to be
Mm-hmm.
pretty nondescript, I never had fatigue or brain fog issues, right? So after this happened, suddenly it feels like my body just isn't the same. And I really started looking for answers. And this is, I mean, we could probably talk for 2 hours about everything that happened in the journey, but suffice to say, what I had to do was learn to advocate for myself. And it
Mm-hmm.
was hard. And advocacy, the first few years, I was in Nashville, Tennessee, and it's not the same as Austin, Texas, where I live now. Where advocating here is easy and great because we just have a different kind of community here, a different kind of health community here. In Nashville at the time, I don't know what it's like now, but back then there were very few functional medicine doctors. I did find an
Mm-hmm.
integrative doctor immediately, but I can't say that my experience with him was much different than anyone else, except he would actually run my labs, which was great because some doctors wouldn't even run my labs, right? I
Sure.
went back to my primary care doctor and was told her everything I'd been experiencing. It's been 6 months at this time, and I'm still dealing with the fog and the fatigue and and these question marks in my head of like, what happened to me? And she really pushed back on my energy of like, let's run tests and let's see what's going on in my body. And she just pushed back and your labs are normal and everything is fine. Things are fine and it's okay and your body just needs to recover and everything's going to be fine. And finally she said, Misty, even if I did run labs, I wouldn't know what they meant.
Mm-hmm.
And it was another like, I mean, I am as a patient, I am shocked. I am sitting in doctors' offices like mind blown emoji, right? Like I can't even believe I'm hearing this from people. Like my perception was that as a doctor, I'm going to go to you and you're going to help me heal my body and you know what's going on in our bodies. And the reality was something very, very different, and I have uh, dozens of stories like this of things that
Yep.
I experienced with doctors and, eventually learned a better way of advocating, better doctors. And I started looking at different things. I started learning the things that really make us sick. What really makes us sick isn't endometriosis. Endometriosis is the result of deeper things that are making us sick, right? But,
I want
as
to go
patients,
there
we don't
too.
know that.
I
Yeah,
want to go
yeah,
there, but can I go back in time? So I
yeah.
also have had stage 4 endometriosis. I've had multiple laparoscopies, and I have a whole story with infertility and whatnot. Way better now. I have no pain with my cycles, and was able to conceive a child. However, so there's good news. But let me go back. Were you having painful cycles when you went in to see your doctor? Were you
Very.
having any symptoms or no
Uh-huh.
symptoms?
Major. Oh
Okay.
yeah, but it was very normalized in my world. Like my girlfriends had painful cycles and I would tell my doctors or GYNs about my painful cycles and it's like, women have painful cycles. So I didn't know
Deal
that
with it. Yeah.
a
Yeah.
7 day period is a really long period. I mean, I would bleed so heavily the first 4 days that I would go through Super Plus tampons in an hour.
Mm-hmm.
Like I had really heavy, my cramping was so bad I would have to sleep with the heating pad and I popped ibuprofen like it was candy. So I
Mm-hmm.
definitely had all the telltale signs of endometriosis, but it didn't occur to me that something was wrong.
Mm-hmm.
It did not occur to me that something was wrong. And I can tell you that it didn't occur to my girlfriends either. We all just thought, well, Aunt Flo comes once a month and she brings cramps and she brings bleeding and she brings, long periods. We need
Mm-hmm.
ibuprofen, we need heating pads, pass the Midol,
Yep.
it's so normalized. Like women do not even know that something is wrong. And this is a deeper systemic issue in our entire culture, by the way, not just in medicine,
Yep.
where
Yep.
the
And not
plight of
just for
women and the pain.
endometriosis. Yeah, but
Yes,
still, yeah. Yeah.
everything. Yes, the plight of women is overlooked and minimized. And, we have all these symptoms and what's happening in our body. And it's, they put women in asylums 1,000 years, 100 years ago. In the 1800s, women went into asylums when they, were insistent that something was wrong or they were disturbed in a way that, wasn't easily handled by their husbands. And by the way, they did not have to consent. Their husband could just say, my wife needs to be committed. And she was committed. She had virtually no
Ugh.
right. So you think
Yeah.
about where we were, and
Yeah.
it wasn't really that long ago, to where we are now. I mean, there's just a lot of systemic things that still need to be eradicated. And, that's what we get to do. We get to shine the light. That's really
Yep.
what my mission is now, is to shine the light and help people know,
Yep.
give them another narrative. These are all narratives, right?
Yep.
So here's another narrative about what's happening and, how can you really empower yourself?
I love you
So
talking
yeah,
about advocacy and yes, empowerment. And I think this is why functional medicine is so extremely important because again, we'll just use endometriosis as this example, but for endometriosis, it is entirely normalized that it's fine to just take ibuprofen, right? Or take birth control for decades. I
yeah,
know I never took birth control. My parents never let me go that route. Thankfully, they were like, absolutely no. But I
yeah.
popped lots of ibuprofen, which led to fructose intolerance, a lot of gut issues. I ended up, testing positive for celiac. Lo and behold, there is definitely an association between celiac and endometriosis, but taking all the medications just destroyed my gut and further led to
Mhm.
food sensitivities and whatnot. Again, none of my doctors, my chiropractor actually was the only one that could, maybe draw any sort of association back then when I was young, before I even knew about functional medicine and whatnot. So it is really sad, but that is why I think functional medicine exists, thankfully, and we do have to be an advocate. And I want to know. So I already mentioned a little bit of my story, but I want to know, what do you think? What did you discover? You mentioned, you connected the dots with lifestyle and whatnot. What did you find? What do you think made you sick? What led to the endometriosis?
Um, well, I'm surely there were genetic things at play, right? And things in my lifestyle were triggering those things genetically. So, you look back, it's hard to say. We can only like try to read the tea leaves,
Mm-hmm.
right? And speculate
Yep. Yep.
about what really happened and what was going on. But certainly I was exposed to a lot of inflammation.
Mm-hmm.
And I think about my diet growing up, like how we ate. Like my mom's version of healthy was doing wheat bread instead of white bread. Like that was the world that I came from. And we did a lot of macaroni and cheese and hamburger helper and all these. I mean, I'm sure everything I was putting in my mouth as a kid was creating inflammation in my body, and then who knows what else I was exposed to in my environment. I mean, I've since learned, and if you've been around the space for a while, that toxicity in some form is what's causing the inflammation for all of us, and it could be, it's a toxin you can kind of wrap your head around, but we also have like toxic emotions, toxic lifestyles. I mean, I went through a lot of, some big T and some little T traumas as a kid. And so all of these things really add up. I remember, I'm sure one of the homes we lived in at least had some kind of mold problem. So, there's a lot of things that were probably stacking on top of each other. And, when you're exposed to a lot of inflammation, this is when your genes started expressing. And so whatever you're genetically predisposed to tends to, reveal itself. But when I look back, I remember from my second period on, my first period, I don't remember being super heavy, but from my second period on, it was a really heavy 7-day period. I mean, it was the entire time that I've been menstruating, it's been really heavy. It's not now, right? But before the surgery, pre 35. So yeah, I'm sure there's a whole lot of things that were contributing. And, now I know like a little bit more of what I should be looking for if I really want to heal my body. And it's really all those upstream stressors and, what are the things, the mold, the heavy metals, I along after this experience with the surgery, about a year later, I had another experience of them improperly drilling mercury from my teeth. But at the time I had no idea it was done improperly. And I didn't connect the dots between this experience in my mouth and my body in the next few months gaining 45 pounds. I had
Were you having
no idea
fillings
those were related.
placed or fillings removed?
But the fillings were replaced. I had mercury fillings in my mouth. I actually had to go in 2 different times because one time they did this side and one time they did this side. But they basically drilled out all my mercury fillings. I think I had 4, and they replaced them with the white composite. So, and no one used protection, including the dentist and the hygienist. Like nobody was doing anything special. I was opening my mouth just as if I was having my teeth cleaned. Right. So I know now that that's why I gained 45 pounds. Right. And then I was also living in a home that was built in 1892, this beautiful restored Victorian in East Nashville that was stunning. But I was living there when this happened with the mercury. And it's likely that I was also picking up mold in that house. And all these things together were contributing to, what happened with my body. But those are the things that happened to me around 2013. And I didn't connect the dots until 2018 that the mercury was connected to the weight gain. The solutions that I began to find were, oh, Misty, your hormones are really low. You have premature ovarian failure. I was 38 years old. You have premature ovarian failure. I'm like, is this connected to the surgery that I had? And it was like, oh, we don't know, but we're just going to put you on hormones, which helped. I lost half the weight with hormones and the other half with dieting. And that was helpful. Right. But nobody figured out like what happened to her. Sure. That was really my own sleuthing over years. And as a patient, I didn't even know what to look for. What are the possible things that could have happened to me? I had no idea at the time. I just eventually pieced it all together. Yeah.
Yep. I see that in my patients, premature ovarian failure. And then you have to really think back and just be asking the history questions. And many times it is a toxin insult on the body. And then they stop cycling, their hormone levels crash. And so I do see that a lot, unfortunately. So your main symptom was weight gain, but all the while, were you still having the fatigue and the brain fog and whatnot?
Yeah. And it would come and go. It definitely got better, but it would come and go. I moved to Austin from Nashville in 2014. So this was a couple of years after the surgery and the mouth stuff and everything. And my fatigue seemed to get better, but then around 2018 or 19, I started having bouts of fatigue again. I think it was 2017, 2018. I found out that I had Epstein-Barr virus that was reflaring, right? So Epstein-Barr was one of the things for me. And the brain fog would dissipate at times, but then I would go through a phase where the brain fog would kind of come back. So even through that period, though, I lost the weight, which to be totally honest is like my number one. I do not want to be inflamed. First of all, it's just psychologically is really jarring as a woman. But second of all, like I'm in the science all the time. And I know what, like when your body is inflamed and you're carrying extra weight, like it triggers every bad thing under the sun. You know? It's like it's a terrifying thing when you really start, studying this. But even my symptoms never were, they've never been explained fully by a doctor. I've connected the dots and then had it verified. Like, oh yeah, I can see that happening. And then someone will ask a few questions and, oh, that's probably what happened for you. But I had another experience of gaining weight about 3 years ago. I gained about 15 pounds and I just couldn't lose it. It wasn't 15 pounds all at once. It was the creeping. It did the creeping and then I would kind of go up and down in this 3 or 4 pound range, but I couldn't lose it again. And last summer I went to my doctor and was like, we have not gotten to the root. We've figured a lot of things out. I've done gut work. My Epstein-Barr doesn't reflare anymore. A lot of quality of life markers are really good for me, but I'm dealing with this and I started feeling a little bit of brain fog. So that's when we found the mold. We found the mold last year. I'm currently detoxing mold as we speak. I've been able to lose 10 of the pounds, which as you can imagine, I'm pretty elated by.
Yeah.
But I have mold toxicity and it's like, it's not in I've had my whole home tested. It's not my current environment, which doesn't surprise me because my symptoms precede us living in this house. So it could have been in my last place. There could have been mold there, but it's more likely that I've had mold at least since Nashville, but even I could have had it in my system from even growing up. And it was just never tested, never diagnosed. We never saw it. I was not the ideal mold, candidate, meaning I wasn't exhibiting a lot of the symptoms except for some brain fog and weight gain. But a lot, like I know people that have mold toxicity and it's major neurological symptoms, right? And I'm not exhibiting any of those. So if without my advocacy, going to my doctor, whom I love and saying, hey, we've got to find out what's happening here and why this is happening, we never would have even tested, So thank God we did and we discovered it. But I have I can tell you, here's the different diagnoses that I've had, but I actually don't think that's that important. Other than people relate to it and are like, oh my God, Misty, I'm dealing with the same thing. What has helped me move the needle the most is figuring out what is the stuff way under the surface that's creeping up and creating all the symptoms. And that's the conversation that I think is really, really important for us to have. It's where I've been able to move the needle the most in my own life. It was never finding the perfect endometriosis protocol. That didn't do it. I mean, manage the symptoms, yes, but true healing didn't come from that, and even Epstein-Barr, how I eventually my Epstein-Barr quit reflaring, not because I did something special for Epstein-Barr, but because I did a lot of gut work and a lot of gut rebalancing, and my Epstein-Barr just quit reflaring. Obviously your immune system lives in your gut, and when that's supported better, right, it just has kept the Epstein-Barr at bay. So, it's fascinating getting into our space and learning from amazing people like you, like what's really going on in our bodies and what we should look for. And my experience has been the things we need to heal are not the things on the surface.
Tell me too. So all the while when you were gaining all this weight, had you already committed to very clean eating? Like we were just talking about paleo FX. Were you already just all for the listeners?
Things. Oh yeah. I found the paleo movement early. By late 2011, I had heard about Paleo FX, which is an event, but obviously the movement that was attached to that. So I had cleaned up my diet. I was fully paleo. I had been gluten-free since 2011. I had removed all of the synthetic rugs in my home and got natural fibered ones. I'd cleaned out under the sink and all the chemicals in my house, got rid of all of it. My house was hardwired. No Wi-Fi in my house. I'd gone through and got meters and tested and like shut down Bluetooth everywhere. I mean, I really was doing all the things. So it was shocking. I was working out with a trainer. It was shocking that I was gaining weight. Like, how could this even be possible with all the things I'm doing? Like I am doing, like, what else can I possibly do? Which is actually a very demoralizing, defeating feeling. Like I'm doing all the things and it's not enough. And my body still isn't responding. And with the weight gain came a lot of sleep issues. I too, in 2011, after the surgery, I reached out to a chiropractor friend of mine because I was just like, well, conventional medicine is not going to help, right? Reached out to him. And one of the first things he asked me was, Misty, how's your sleep? Like, well, not great, I guess. I don't go to bed but not bad. It was very normalized, just like my periods,
Mhm.
right? I go to bed at 2 a.m. and I sleep about 7 hours a night. And I wake up feeling like I've been hit by a Mack truck, just exhausted. I'm not a morning person. That was always my story. I'm not a morning person. And he immediately like stopped me and he's like, you, you have hormone issues and
Mhm.
your body makes hormones between 10 and 2, and you're not going to bed until 2. And if you don't get your sleep fixed, we can't fix you. Like nothing else is going to work. And it was confronting to hear. And at that point, I was desperate and would do anything. This was even before I found paleo and cleaned up my diet and all the things. Like the first thing I did was start working on my sleep. So um, to this day, sleep is something that I'm acutely aware of. I was very impressed upon during that initial conversation. And I really notice when my sleep is off. I've had every kind of sleep issue you can imagine, right? And all different treatments for them. It just depends on where I'm at in my journey. Um, so yeah, sleep is a good barometer of what's actually happening in your body. And if you're not sleeping, you're not healing. And I did a
Mhm.
whole event on this and we relaunched it. We've done it twice. I'll probably do another one because I don't think we talk about sleep enough. It's hugely, hugely important for the healing process. We spend all this money on these therapies and, biohacking stuff and supplements and then our bodies can't heal because we're not sleeping well.
Mhm.
So sleep is massively, massively important. And when things start to affect my sleep, it really gets my attention. Yeah.
Me too. Absolutely. So obviously you struggle with some weight gain, some sleep issues, some hormone imbalances. So you kind of shared a little bit about your journey. But why do you think it's easier for some women to get well as compared to others? Like you obviously ran into a lot of variables, a lot of hurdles
Yeah.
there.
Yeah.
So why do you feel like it's easier for some women versus others?
Yeah. Well, I think it depends on how much toxicity that you're exposed to. And then I think it also depends on how well your body can deal with said toxicity, right? Like some
Yep.
people genetically are able to deal with toxicity and toxic exposure a lot better than others. Some people have stronger methylation systems and,
Hmm.
they're just able to process that stuff through. So, I think a lot of it's genetics. It's kind of frustrating to hear that because you want to have a little more control than that, but there definitely is a genetic component. And then, what all are you exposed to and what is your lifestyle like? So, if we were all out in nature, not exposed to toxicity at all, I doubt we would be seeing much chronic disease, period.
Agreed. Yep.
So yeah, that's the root of it.
Can we go back? So we've talked a lot about, in your case, the environmental stressors, but I know you've also mentioned the emotional stressors. So
Yeah.
I want to get into this a little bit, like how we diagnose and find deep stressors and that, like, especially the emotional piece of that. Can you go there?
Yeah. Well, I kind of touched on it a little bit in this interview, just talking about some of the early mindset stuff that had
Hmm.
me dealing with all of this alone.
Yeah.
I had a little T trauma that might be a midway between little and big. I don't know, probably depends on who you asked, but growing up, I was the oldest of four. My parents had a really toxic relationship, and my dad was very patriarchal, believed that housework was woman's work kind of thing. So I had a mom who was working full time and coming home and doing all the cooking, all the cleaning, taking care of the kids. She was responsible for everything. And in order to be responsible for everything, she relied on me as the firstborn to help her with the household. So I was very responsible from a young age. I remember being
Yeah.
7 years old and my mom leaving me with my sisters while they went to run errands. And I look back and like I look at other 7-year-olds and I'm thinking, what was my mother thinking? Like that is just insane to me. But it was very normal at the time. I didn't think, Mom, can you watch your sisters while we go? Sure. So I grew up being mother's helper. I was wired for responsibility very young,
Yep.
and this made it so normal for me was being uber responsible. I didn't have a sense of like in my home, I couldn't really have needs because if I had needs, the person that was going to provide for my needs was my mother, and she was taxed to the max. So having a need that I needed my mother to fill for me when my mother was already so spread thin and I could see that she was giving everything she possibly could, conditioned me to not have like I have to meet my own needs, right?
Hmm.
And in some ways there's certainly I'm very resourceful, and I'm very responsible for myself. I don't tend to project and blame a lot, right? I'm a very take responsibility person, but we all need support. And when you're going to be super responsible, you especially need support so that you can be accountable. So it wasn't a pattern that I started getting present to until this journey started for me, because I remember the lonely, overwhelmed feeling of I'm going through something that I can't be everything for myself that I would like to be because I'm compromised, right? And what do I do about that? It was very uncomfortable to consider asking other people for help. I felt vulnerable and exposed. I felt weak in a way that was very disempowering because of how I saw things. So it's been a big part of my journey over the last decade to shift a lot of that and to learn how to live in a way where I'm being supported. Armstrong's work was really life-changing for me in this area because she has an audio program that you can get on Audible called Celebrate Partnership, where she talks about the dynamic present in partnership. So you could think of partnership as romantic partnership, but she really speaks about partnership as something that exists everywhere in our life. And when someone is in the accountable role of partnership, in the I am responsible, they must be supported in order to fulfill that goal of responsibility. So in a very traditional sense, men are accountable, and they get the support of their wives, right? So it's very easy and normal for a man to expect support. Look how my father expected it from my mother. It was conditioned in him from a very young age that he was worthy of the support, that he could expect, even demand the support, right? But that isn't something that's conditioned into us as women at all. And we don't often see where we need support in order to fulfill on a given responsibility. We will take responsibility on without the support we need to be successful, and then we will run ourselves into the ground. And so I just saw this pattern playing in there's so many faces to this in my life. It's why I was single for so long. I didn't meet my partner until I was 42. I dated a ton, but the way that I showed up really didn't create the space that another person needs to be in relationship in the way that I wanted to create relationships. So I've had a deep spiritual journey that has tacked right along with this physical one. Yeah, we've got to get rid of all these stressors, but I've had to change my whole way of being in the world. And I wish I could tell you that it was a journey brought on by awareness, and then I just started doing things differently, and it was great, but it was actually terrible and painful going through it because I had built a lot of structures and relationships and a way of being in the world that suddenly didn't work for me anymore. And the people that I was in relationship with did not like the rule change, right? And so there was a lot of loss. I experienced an implosion in my business with my team. Suddenly I wanted to expect more from my team, and they didn't sign up to have more expected from them. Like I was wanting to renegotiate the terms of a relationship that they were fine with. They were fine with how it was going. And now I want it to be different. Well, then there's a fallout from that, right? So it was very challenging. 2016, 2017, brutal years for me. But man, I look back and I wouldn't change a thing because I was able to change so many dynamics in my life that have set me up to be so much happier and more supported. And, it's made a massive difference in my level of stress, which ultimately is the thing that's breaking all of us down, stress and inflammation. So
it's hard to sum up your story in just 30 minutes or whatnot, but it sounds like you found the importance of clean eating and reducing inflammation, and then you found somehow the toxins that were in your life, whether they were an environmental or emotional, whatnot. And so is that
I would say I'm finding.
You're still finding. Yeah. Good.
Yeah.
Good,
I mean,
yeah.
I that's how I feel. I definitely don't feel like my journey is complete and I've arrived. Right. I mean, I just discovered mold last year. So I've been on this journey for a really long time. I've gotten a lot of great victory. I'm helping a lot of women in our community, and I can't say that I'm perfect. Right. So I'm still definitely on the journey. And there's a part of me that feels like this journey might be ongoing for the rest of my life, not from the perspective of I'll never be to a place where I really have victory, but just toxic exposure is everywhere and it's insidious. I mean, we have women in our community who have breast implant illness and they've been sick forever. There's one girl that comes to mind that has had SIBO. I've known her for years, and she went on hormone therapy, and that really helped her SIBO. Actually, she quit having a lot of the SIBO issues, but then things started coming back up. And she eventually discovered that it was all from her breast implants, right? So she had her breast implants removed and she's gotten way, way better. But, she got some wins on the journey, applying a lot of the things that we know really helps increase your quality of life. But until she discovered the deeper stressor, which was her breast implants, and then had those removed, she was never going to be totally well. And, I think I didn't know that my fillings were being improperly drilled from my mouth at the time. There could definitely be a time in the future where I don't realize I'm experiencing a
Yeah.
toxic exposure that, derails my life in some way. And then I have to
Yeah.
eradicate it again. So, I mean, I'm way, way, way healthier than I was at 35 when all of this happened. Right. But we live in a toxic world, and that's just the reality of what we're doing. And we can do all this lifestyle stuff to take care of it. And we can do the testing or whatever. And it really helps us to manage our health really well. But I mean, they dump some 250 pounds per person of chemicals and Roundup on our shores every day. I mean, it's unreal the amount of chemicals that are in our environment and the exposure that we're under. So, this is, I think, a lifelong journey for all of us. And those of us that don't have that genetic blessing of my body can just, like my partner, his body just processes all of it out.
Yeah.
He doesn't have
Not fair.
any
No,
issues. Yeah, it totally feels not fair sometimes, but whatever, it is what it is, right? So he and his daughter, they don't, their bodies just can handle it, right? But not everyone's body's like that, and that's why we have so many people that are getting sick.
For your story, have you created a community then to help women determine where these stressors are?
Yeah, I really, what I want Healing Rosie to be about is to teach women to advocate for themselves, right? Because it's really been my relentless, you're not going to tell me that everything's fine and my labs are normal, right? It's my belief, and first of all, my own reason and I know that what you're telling me isn't true. And because of that, I'm going to continue to pursue the truth for myself, I think that's really what we all need to be doing as women. But we live culturally, women are taught to suppress their own inner wisdom and inner guidance. I mean, it is insidious. We are, and some of this is changing, but we all grew up in times where it wasn't necessarily like this, but we are accountable and responsible. Like we defer authority to our dads and moms, our husbands or partners, the police officer, the teacher at school, the headmaster, the governing board, the government, insert who is ultimately the authority here, right? So we get so disconnected from our own inner authority that's telling us, hey, something is wrong, something isn't right. What they're telling you isn't true. We are conditioned to believe them and trust them and not have to think and worry about it, right? And I really think it's a part of our society that is toxic and evil. And it's something that we all have to get more present to, because at the end of the day, we are accountable for ourselves. At the end of the day, nobody else, whatever you feel about judgment and life beyond here, no one's answering for you. You're not going to stand at the pearly gates and give an accounting for your life and be able to blame your husband or the police officer or, the governor. Like, we are all ultimately accountable. So what does that mean? And how do we take our power back in a culture, in a society that constantly takes our power from us and normalizes it so much? And I really believe this is a reason why a lot of women especially, but men too, get sick and stay sick and don't ever move beyond it, because even though something inside of them is that Big Ben that I was hearing, sitting in the doctor's office over a decade ago, they suppress it, shut it down, silence it, push it away. That's not what they said. And the doctor said this, and I'm going to do what the doctor said. And they lose their life because of it. I watched my cousin Jan at 55 die a terrible, sad death after maybe 6 years of struggling with rheumatoid arthritis and fibromyalgia. They had her on opiates. She was on diabetes medication. She was a shell of herself. And when I would talk to her about it, she's like, well, I've got to do what my doctor says. If I don't do what my doctor says, he could drop me from his practice, or she could drop me from her practice, or my insurance company. There's this desire to please, and I want to be a good patient, and I want to do what you say. And we derive pleasure out of doing what other people say and tell us to do. And she died. My cousin, it's been over 2 years, and he is so devastated to this day. They've been together since they were 15. He's lost his life partner. It's like terrible, but it was all driven by this taking of our power and giving it to other people, and not feeling permission to own it for ourselves and find solutions so that we get our lives back. So that's really what I want for our community. I want these women to have permission, and then I want them to have the tools. Like, I want you to know what are the labs you should run and what are those optimal values. I want you to know, like, here's the things that could really be making you sick, and this is what you need to be looking at with your doctor. I want you to know how to find a doctor. I want you to know how to talk to your doctor. I want you to know how to advocate for yourself with the health insurance company that tries to tell you things aren't covered, because there's strategies for all of this stuff. But until you decide that you're going to sit in the driver's seat and figure this stuff out, you're going to spin in sick. I had a man after my first event send me an email. I'll try not to cry, talking about his wife, whom he lost, and telling me that when she was diagnosed, that the doctor basically told her that she needed to take, certain drugs, and insinuated that she was overreacting and making things up in her head. And her husband would go to the appointments with her. When he would hear the doctor say this at home, he would minimize and dismiss her experience. And eventually she died, right? And to this day, he is wrecked, because he sees what happened to his wife, that she got caught up in the system. He sees how he was listening to the doctors and what they had to say about his wife's situation, and then turning around and essentially blaming her and telling her she was making things up. The doctor has a different version of what her reality is, and he lost her, and he can't get her back. We can't get Jan back. We don't get a do-over on giving our power away and letting other people tell us this is the path you should go down, even though something inside of us says that isn't right. And I want to get my life back, and I want to be healed. So I want everyone to know their own power and know what they can do. And that's why we have Healing Rosie.
Awesome. Beautiful. Well, tell us more about that site where listeners can find you, and about the upcoming masterclass you have.
Yeah. Well, healingrosie.com is our website. We have lots and lots of resources on the website, lots of free downloads, including that lab tracker that I just mentioned, where you can see what the optimizing labs are and what their optimal values are. I remember finally getting a doctor to run my labs. I went doctor, run my labs. And then I got my labs back. I had no idea what anything meant. I'm like looking at it like it's Greek, like, okay, well, now I have this, but if the doctor just tells me all this is normal, I don't have any choice but to believe him, right? So I want people to actually know what optimal values look like from a functional lens, right? This is what it looks like when things are fairly healthy. And then we have a masterclass that's starting in a week from the time this is airing, called Radical Healing, Detox Your Stress and Stressors, that is really inspired by the most recent orbit of my journey of, going back to my doctor and saying something is still wrong. And what I have found is that focusing on Epstein-Barr virus and endometriosis and premature ovarian failure actually has not been healing for me. I have not been able to eradicate those diseases by focusing on them. I have been able to get my life back and reverse symptoms by going after deep stressors. And I wish I would have known in the beginning what they were and how to test for them. And, I probably would have shaved years off of, what is now an 11-year journey, but I didn't know. I had no idea what to test for, what to look for, what could possibly be wrong in my system. And so I spent years playing whack-a-mole and going to different doctors, hoping a doctor would know. And what I actually now 11 years in have realized is that actually not one time did I go to a doctor or practitioner and they shone a light on what was really happening. It was only through my own inquiry and my own persistence did we start uncovering things. It was never a doctor taking lead on that. Now, that doesn't mean that's true for everyone, because I certainly have people in our community that go to doctors and doctors are very helpful, right? But what I'm committed to for all of us is holding a container as best I can where you are not at the mercy of hopefully you have an amazing doctor, right? I want you to be empowered with, here's what you need to look for, and find a doctor that can help you. And I will say, incidentally, because you made a comment about functional medicine, which I'm very grateful for functional medicine. And I think there's a lot, not all functional medicine doctors and practitioners are the same. Just because someone says they're functional medicine
Yep.
does not mean that they know how to test for lab and metals and how to eradicate them.
Mm-hmm.
We had a girl in our community who was going back and forth between a conventional doctor and a functional doctor. She was super sick. Like, we were watching her deteriorate. She was posting weekly, almost daily at times, with all the symptoms she was dealing with around her gut. And finally I said to her, your doctors aren't helping you. She would say, one doctor said this and one doctor, and I tried this and then I stopped this. And then this new thing came up. She needed to find another doctor. Mm-hmm. She reached out to 10 functional medicine doctors. Only 2 of the 10 knew how to test for deep stressors. 2 of the 10. So we still have to be vigilant, right? We still have to make sure that we are asking the right questions and we know how to steer our ship. So that's Healing Rosie. And the masterclass, Radical Healing Detox for Stress and Stressors, is meant to empower you with information that I wish I would have had in the beginning of what are the stressors that are making us sick. Stress creates inflammation. Inflammation creates all the disease. So if we can identify what the stressors are and remove them, the body knows what to do and the body will heal itself. But we need to know, each one of us needs to know what those stressors are and then what that healing path looks like so we can align ourselves the right way with experts that can help us. So masterclass is next week.
Awesome. We'll post a link to that in the show notes. I have to ask you a few more things and echo kind of what you just said.
Yes.
So I think in every field there are, I don't even want to say good and bad, there are providers who are way more experienced. And I think I'm young, but I've been in my field a long time. And I know there are other providers, even in the community, that have started to offer functional medicine, and they test the adrenals and they do food sensitivity testing, right? They're dabbling, they're learning. And I think
they're dabbling. Absolutely. That's right.
I think a lot of patients get excited that, oh, there's a new functional medicine provider, but literally who has zero experience with mold toxicity, right? Or Lyme disease or heavy metal, testing, whatnot. And so all this being said, pretty much this whole interview boils down to being an advocate for yourself. It's not that those providers can't help. Those providers provide an amazing foundation for patients. But that's where I got to plug my book here real quick. So in my book, Your Longevity Blueprint, I really help patients know what all tests are available for every single organ system in their body, because chapter 1 is all about gut health. And a lot of functional medicine providers are great working with gut health, but that's one organ system. That's one step of building a healthy body. So if you haven't read my book, I highly advise that you check that out. Link is always in the show notes there as well. But I want to go back to Healing Rosie. So where did that name come from? Does it have anything to do with the picture behind you? Okay.
Well, it was inspired by Rosie the Riveter for sure, but it actually comes from a story in my own family. I actually come from, my great grandmother was an entrepreneur, and not because she wanted to be actually, but in 1933, I believe it was, my great grandfather died of double pneumonia. He was a furrier in downtown Columbus, Ohio. They had 6 children, and when he died, my great grandmother was left with 6 kids, and people in the community started coming up to orphan the children, because that's what you did back in those days. There was no child services and, everything else to help families. There was no government assistance. It was like, oh, mom can't provide. Mom is not a provider. So we need to get these kids in homes where they can be provided and work on farms and whatever. And she had already lost her husband. She was devastated at the idea of also losing her family. So she went to the man who had been helping her husband run the family business, and she asked him to stay on, and she took it over. In the 1930s, headed right into the Great Depression, which of course she wouldn't have known that at the time. And she ran that business, raised her kids as a single mom when there was no such thing. And really kind of laid the foundation for what really feels to me as the culture in my family. Even today, my mom is a very hard worker. Her and her siblings are really empowered. My aunt, which was her daughter, so my grandmother's sister, super, super spunky. She told me a story of World War II. Her husband was in Germany in the Air Force fighting the Nazis in World War II. And Rosie the Riveter called the women to work in the factories. And of course, her mother was an entrepreneur. She witnessed her mother providing for the family pretty much her whole life. So she was one of the first women to go to the factories and work to support the war effort. And she got a letter from her husband that took 3 weeks to reach her, by the way, from Germany, because that's how it was back then, telling her that she was bringing shame on the family. How dare she work? What was she thinking? She must quit immediately. And she tells me this story with a sparkle in her eye, and I actually think she ended up quitting, because that's what you did back then when your husband told you to do something. But I just love that she was one of the first women that participated. And I feel like I stand on her shoulders. I identify with my Aunt Florence more than any other woman in my family outside of my mother. And I have been conditioned to be a woman who takes responsibility. And while I've had to work on the yang of that, I've had to work on allowing support to come in. It really is this legacy I have of taking responsibility that kind of sets the tone for what Healing Rosie is, because that's what I want for all the women in our community. I want you to feel empowered to take responsibility. And I also want you to understand the nuance and insights of getting all of the support you need in order to heal. So yeah, that's the Rosie connection.
Love it. Love it. Tell us your top longevity tip.
Sleep. By far, sleep. When you sleep, you heal. And when you get enough sleep, your body is able to completely restore, rejuvenate. And if you're not sleeping, you're not healing. It is the most important dimension of healing for all of us to get right and figure out. And if you're having trouble sleeping, I would say, just like we don't focus on the disease itself to get our lives back and to heal, I would say if you're not sleeping, you should really start going under the surface and figuring out what is keeping you from being able to sleep well. And I will say that for a lot of women, it's hormones. If you have low progesterone, you might have trouble falling asleep. If you have low estrogen, you might have trouble staying asleep. There's a whole lot of sleep tips, that can help with sleep optimization. You could definitely dive into my work more for it. I'm sure that you have some stuff too, Stephanie, that can really help people, but sleep is my number one longevity tip.
It's the most popular, that's the most common answer I get.
Yeah.
Although everyone expands a little differently, but I agree.
Yeah.
So it must be important.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for coming on the show today and really just sharing your story and dedicating your life to helping women with Healing Rosie. So I hope all the listeners check you out. Thanks so much.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me. It's been awesome.